The date was October 23, 1944. Deep in the shadowy forests of Belgium, not far from the German frontier, Wehrmacht veterans crouched in their dugouts and foxholes. These were not green recruits, but hardened survivors of Europe's most brutal campaigns. They had endured the frozen hell of the Russian steppes, the burning sands of North Africa, and the grinding attrition of Italy. They had stared into the abyss of war and lived to tell of it. They had fought the disciplined British, the merciless Soviets, and now they braced themselves for another American assault. Yet something about this moment felt different. Intelligence reports whispered through German headquarters spoke of a new American division arriving at the front. The 104th Infantry Division. They called themselves the Timberwolves. Fresh from the United States, untested in combat, these men were assumed to be little more than farmhands and factory boys in uniform. German officers smirked at the thought. Breaking such a division would be child's play. They had shattered American units before. They would do it again. But what those German soldiers did not yet realize was that these Timberwolves were led by a commander unlike any they had ever faced. A man whose very name would soon be muttered in fear across German lines. He was reckless, unorthodox, and relentless to the point of obsession. His own superiors had once dismissed him for being too aggressive. The Americans called him Terrible Terry Allen, and he was about to carve his legend into the forests of Belgium. This is not merely the tale of battlefield maneuvers or tactical brilliance. It is the story of a man who refused to play by the book when the book cost lives. A man who drank too much, cursed too often, and cared more about victory than about polished boots or spotless uniforms. A man disgraced at the height of his career, only to return more dangerous than ever. To understand why German soldiers came to dread the name Terry Allen, we must trace his story back to its roots. Early life and family legacy. Terry Allen was born on April 1, 1888, at Fort Douglas in the Utah Territory. Soldiering was in his blood. His father, Colonel Samuel Allen, was a career officer who had spent his life moving from post to post across the American frontier. But the martial tradition ran even deeper. Terry's maternal grandfather, Captain Carlos Alvarez de la Mesa, had fought at Gettysburg during the Civil War. De la Mesa served with Company C of the 39th New York Volunteer Infantry, known as the Garibaldi Guard, a unit of Italian immigrants who had come to America seeking freedom and found themselves defending it on the battlefield. On July 2, 1863, during the savage fighting at the Peach Orchard and Wheatfield, Captain de la Mesa was gravely wounded. Thousands of men fell in those few hours, yet he survived, recovered, and fought until the war's end. This legacy of sacrifice and service was the air Terry Allen breathed. In the Allen family, the Army was not just a profession, it was destiny. From the Civil War to the Indian Wars, and now into the uncertain conflicts of the 20th century, the Allens were soldiers. Growing up on remote military posts, young Terry learned to ride before he could properly read, and to shoot before he mastered arithmetic. He was a child of the old cavalry army, raised in the belief that wars were still won by men on horseback charging across open plains. That frontier upbringing would shape him forever, for better and for worse. West Point and failure in 1907, Terry Allen achieved what every military family dreamed of, an appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point. Here was his chance to follow in his father's footsteps, to join the officer corps in the grandest tradition. But Allen despised West Point. He loathed the endless mathematics, the rigid discipline, the suffocating classrooms. He stuttered when called upon, racked up demerits for petty infractions, and earned the nickname "Tear Around the Mess Hall Allen" for his restless energy. The academy was designed for men who could sit still, memorize, and obey. Terry Allen was built for action. In 1911, after repeated academic failures, first in mathematics, then in ordnance and gunnery, he was dismissed. For most men, such disgrace would have ended any hope of a military career. But Allen was stubborn. If the front door was closed, he would find a side entrance. He enrolled at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., where he studied hard, earned a Bachelor of Arts in 1912, and on November 30th of that year received his commission as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Cavalry. He had made it, not by tradition, but by sheer determination. This refusal to accept defeat, this instinct to find another way, would define his entire career. Early service in World War I. Allen's first posting was along the Mexican border in 1913. One day, with only 6 soldiers under his command, he confronted 30 Mexican cattle rustlers who had crossed into U.S. territory. Doctrine said to wait for reinforcements. Allen attacked. By the end, all 30 rustlers were captured or dead. It was not the action of a cautious officer, but of a man who saw what needed to be done and did it. Consequences be damned. When the United States entered World War I, Allen was desperate to see combat. Like many young officers, he feared the war would end before he had the chance to prove himself. In 1918, he finally shipped out to France, though not in the role he wanted. He was assigned to the 315th Ammunition Train of the 90th Division, hauling shells to the front. It was unglamorous work, but he was there, and that mattered. Eventually, Allen got his chance. He took command of the 3rd Battalion, 358th Infantry Regiment, 90th Division. He led his men at Saint-Mihiel in September 1918, and later in the Meuse-Argonne offensive, the largest battle in American history. It was here, in the mud and blood of the Western Front, that Allen developed his signature innovation, night attacks. The birth of a tactic most commanders avoided night operations. They were too risky. Units could get lost. Friendly fire was common, and coordination was nearly impossible. Doctrine dictated defense at night, attack by day. Allen saw it differently. He realized that night assaults, when carefully planned, save lives. In daylight, machine guns cut down advancing troops, artillery spotted targets with ease, and defenders had every advantage. At night, those advantages vanished. Surprise became the attacker's ally. Confusion, which terrified other commanders, worked in Allen's favor. Defenders fired blindly at shadows, wasted ammunition, and often broke under the psychological strain of an unseen enemy. Allen developed a system. Daylight reconnaissance. Simple plans every soldier could memorize. Prearranged signals with whistles or flares, and designated rally points in case of confusion. His mantra was simple: keep it simple, move silently, strike hard when discovered. On October 24, 1918, Allen was shot in the face by machine gun fire during an assault. Tagged for evacuation, he convinced doctors to return him to his men. Bloodied but unbroken, he fought on. His soldiers saw their commander, face streaming with blood, refusing to leave them. The message was clear: we are in this together. I will not abandon you. Follow me. For his actions that day, Allen received the Silver Star and 2 Purple Hearts. Between the wars, when the war ended, Allen returned home with a reputation as a fearless combat leader. But the interwar years were brutal for ambitious officers. The U.S. Army shrank from over 4 million men in 1918 to barely 130,000 by the mid-1920s. Promotions froze. Men who had commanded battalions in France found themselves captains for decades. Many resigned in frustration. Others drank themselves into obscurity. Allen endured. In 1920, he entered a grueling 300-mile horseback race through central Texas, a contest pitting cowboys against cavalrymen. He finished in 101 hours and 56 minutes, winning the event and proving he still carried the endurance of his frontier upbringing. That same year, Terry Allen added another unlikely achievement to his resume: a bronze medal in polo at the 1920 Summer Olympics in Antwerp, Belgium, representing the United States as part of the Army's equestrian team. He was, at his core, a cavalryman of the old school, a horseman molded by the traditions of the frontier army. Yet even as he excelled in a form of warfare that was fading into history, Allen's sharp eyes were fixed on the future. He devoured military history. Studying every lesson of the Great War, he dissected German tactics, organization, and doctrine. He followed developments in tanks, aircraft, and radio communications with obsessive interest. He understood that the next war would not be won by horsemen charging across open fields. It would be decided by mobility, firepower, and the coordination of combined arms. Most importantly, Allen never stopped training his men. Whether he was stuck in a staff job or commanding a training unit, he pushed for realism, aggression, and discipline. While other officers coasted toward retirement, Allen prepared himself, and anyone under his influence, for the war he knew was coming. Marshall's eye on October 1, 1940, everything changed. General George C. Marshall, the new Army Chief of Staff, was rebuilding the U.S. military as the storm of global war loomed. Marshall had a rare gift for spotting talent, and when he looked at Lieutenant Colonel Terry Allen, he saw something others had overlooked. Against the advice of subordinates who thought Allen too rough, too unpolished, Marshall promoted him directly from lieutenant colonel to brigadier general, skipping the rank of colonel entirely. It was almost unheard of, but Marshall understood the truth. Allen could lead men in combat. Everything else was secondary. In May 1942, Allen received the command that would define his career, the First Infantry Division, the legendary Big Red One, the oldest and most storied division in the U.S. Army. Marshall himself described Allen as outstanding, a leader who can do anything with men and officers. Allen was about to prove him right. Baptism in North Africa on November 8, 1942. The Big Red One stormed ashore at Oran, Algeria as part of Operation Torch, the first American offensive in the European theater. Allen, as always, led from the front. The division suffered 418 casualties in the initial landings, 94 killed, 73 seriously wounded, 178 lightly wounded, and 75 missing, but they secured their objectives. The Americans were finally in the fight. The real test came in Tunisia. The campaign was brutal. The Germans, under Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, were seasoned desert fighters who had been winning battles since 1941. The Americans, by contrast, were green, learning their lessons in blood. In February 1943, Rommel launched a massive counteroffensive at Kasserine Pass. Inexperienced American units broke under the assault. German tanks smashed through defenses, equipment was abandoned, and entire battalions retreated in confusion. The Germans nearly split the Allied armies in two. For the first time, American troops tasted the bitter reality of defeat at the hands of a master enemy. But on February 21st, Allen and General Paul Robinette rallied the line at Jebel El Hamra. Allen personally directed artillery fire and positioned his infantry to blunt the German-Italian advance. His men captured 400 prisoners and stabilized the front. The disaster was contained. The lesson was clear. Americans could stand against the Wehrmacht, but only with the right leadership and tactics. The crucible of El Getar then came El Getar in March 1943, the battle that would define Allen's reputation in North Africa. On March 21st, German armor struck Allen's division. For 21 grueling days, the Big Red One fought off repeated assaults. Day after day, German tanks probed for weaknesses. Day after day, Allen's infantry and anti-tank guns hurled them back. The fighting was savage. Men endured 100-degree heat with little water. Artillery thundered without pause. Casualties mounted on both sides. On March 23rd, the crisis peaked. German tanks broke through forward positions and threatened Allen's headquarters. Staff officers urged him to pull back to safety, a logical move since divisional HQs were never meant to be in the direct line of fire. But Allen understood something deeper. If headquarters pulled back, the frontline troops would see it. Morale could collapse in an instant. His response became legend. "I'll be damned if I pull out, and I'll shoot the first man who does." The headquarters stayed. Allen himself walked outside and calmly watched the German tanks approach. His composure steadied his staff. Forward units, seeing their general standing firm, held their ground. American tank destroyers and artillery engaged the German armor at close range. The attack was repulsed. The line held. El Getar was more than a battle. It was the first time American forces defeated veteran German tank units in World War II. The Wehrmacht had met an American commander who would not retreat, would not panic, and would fight until the enemy broke. Allen had proven that properly led American troops could beat the best Germany had to offer. Victory in North Africa. In May 1943, the Big Red One spearheaded the final drive on Tunis. Combat ended on May 9th. 4 days later, on May 13th, nearly 250,000 Axis troops surrendered. The North African campaign was over. The cost had been steep. In the final 17 days of fighting, the division suffered 2,000 casualties. Some companies were reduced to barely 50 men, but they had won. Sicily, the next trial. The next challenge came swiftly. On July 10, 1943, Allen led the Big Red One ashore at Gela, Sicily, during Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of the island. General George Patton had specifically requested Allen's division for Gela, correctly judging it the most dangerous landing zone. The beaches were exposed, overlooked by German and Italian positions in the hills. If any division could handle it, Patton believed, it was the Big Red One under Terry Allen. The landings went well at first. But on July 11th, German tanks from the Hermann Göring Panzer Division counterattacked toward the beaches. If they broke through, they could split the beachhead and roll up the Allied positions. American infantry, caught in open terrain, fought desperately to hold. Offshore naval guns fired over the heads of U.S. troops, pounding the advancing armor. The combination of naval firepower and Allen's determined infantry finally stopped the Germans just short of the beach. General Omar Bradley, who witnessed the fight, later wrote, "I question whether any other United States division could have repelled that charge." The Big Red One had held. The beachhead was secure. The invasion could continue. The ordeal of Troina, but the hardest fighting was still ahead. The Sicilian campaign became a race between Patton's U.S. 7th Army and Bernard Montgomery's British 8th Army to capture the island. Both commanders pushed their men to the limit. Allen's division was handed some of the toughest objectives. The fiercest came at Troina, a mountain town commanding key roads through Sicily's interior. The Germans had turned it into a fortress. From July 31st to August 6, 1943, Allen's division battered itself against the stronghold. The fighting was merciless. Every building had to be cleared. Every street was covered by machine guns. American infantry attacked uphill into fortified positions, taking heavy losses. The Germans did not merely defend. They counterattacked relentlessly. Over 6 days, they launched 24 separate counterattacks. 24 times Allen's men threw them back. Division artillery fired thousands of shells. Infantry companies dwindled to half strength. Medics worked without rest, yet the Big Red One kept pressing forward, grinding down the defenders. On August 6th, Troina finally fell. The road to Messina was open, but the cost was staggering. The First Infantry Division was exhausted, its men worn thin after nearly 9 months of continuous combat since North Africa. They needed rest. They needed replacements. They needed time to rebuild. Yet on August 9, 1943, Time magazine hit the newsstands with Major General Terry Allen on its cover. The article hailed him as a rising star, a division commander of rare brilliance, already burnished with personal luster. It celebrated his triumphs in Tunisia and Sicily, but there was a cruel irony. 2 days earlier, on August 7th, Omar Bradley had relieved Allen of command of the 1st Infantry Division. The reasons were layered. Bradley believed Allen and his deputy, Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt, Jr., had allowed discipline to fray. The Big Red One had become elite, confident, and battle-hardened, but also, in Bradley's eyes, too loose, too arrogant. He wanted the division tightened up. Allen was replaced by Major General Clarence R. Hubner, yet there was more to the story. Later scholarship suggests Allen's removal had been preordained by Eisenhower and Patton even before the Sicily campaign began. They saw Allen as the perfect man to lead the division through the crucible of early combat, but not the right commander for the long, grinding war ahead. Eisenhower himself later declared, "It is a terrible injustice to General Allen to hint that he was relieved for inefficiency." Bradley, in his memoirs, admitted that none excelled the unpredictable Terry Allen in the leadership of troops, but added that neither Allen nor Roosevelt possessed the instincts of strict disciplinarians. The truth was simple. Terry Allen cared more about winning battles than about parade ground polish. His men adored him for it. His superiors worried about it. And so, at the very peak of his fame, his face on the cover of Time, Allen was sent home. Most officers would have retired in bitterness. Allen asked for another chance. The Timberwolves on October 15, 1943, Allen, reduced back to Brigadier General, took command of the 104th Infantry Division at Camp Adair, Oregon. The demotion stung, but he wasted no time brooding. He had work to do. These were not hardened veterans like the Big Red One. They were green recruits, farm boys and factory workers from the western states, average age barely 20. Most had never traveled far from home. They knew nothing of combat. Allen looked at them and saw raw potential, but potential meant nothing without training. He set out to forge the most rigorously prepared division in the U.S. Army. His method? Mastery of the one thing most units avoided, night fighting. Where standard training called for 10-12 hours of tactical instruction per week, Allen drove his men through 30-35 hours, triple the norm. Some weeks they trained 6 hours a day on top of regular duties. The regimen was relentless, exhausting, and brutally realistic. Allen drilled them to move silently in darkness, to navigate by compass and terrain when visibility was measured in feet. He taught them to communicate without words, using hand signals and prearranged codes. He trained them to coordinate attacks without radios, which could be jammed or intercepted. Above all, he taught them to trust one another completely, because in the dark, you could not see who was beside you. You had to know. The division practiced night attacks endlessly, first in small unit exercises, then company-level maneuvers, then full battalion assaults with artillery support, all in total darkness. Allen insisted on realism, live ammunition, real artillery barrages, smoke to simulate battlefield confusion. His men learned that night combat was terrifying, but that discipline and preparation could turn fear into a weapon. Other divisions at Camp Adair thought Allen was mad. His men stumbled through Oregon forests at 3 in the morning, soaked by rain, blinded by darkness, exhausted beyond measure. But Allen knew what he was doing. He was teaching them to survive. Night attacks, properly executed, meant fewer casualties than daylight assaults. Surprise was on the attacker's side. Defenders were confused, frightened, and blind. Machine guns and artillery could not find their targets. By the time the 104th Infantry Division shipped out to Europe in the summer of 1944, they were the first and only American division trained specifically for night combat. Bradley himself later admitted, "Allen brought the only division I know of that was prepared for night combat." That preparation would save countless lives. Into the fight on October 23, 1944, the Timberwolves entered combat near the German border in Belgium. The German veterans waiting in the forests expected easy prey. Intelligence reports told them this was a green American division, fresh from the States, never tested in battle. They had faced such units before, units that panicked under fire, made predictable mistakes, and collapsed under pressure. This would be another easy defensive victory. Instead, they met a nightmare. That very first night, Allen unleashed his division. Companies slipped silently through the woods, navigating by compass and memory of daylight reconnaissance. They struck German positions from unexpected directions. Sentries were eliminated before they could raise alarms. Strong points were overrun before defenders even understood what was happening. German artillery observers called for fire, but in the darkness, they could not see their targets. Machine gunners blazed away at shadows, wasting ammunition. American infantry seemed to materialize out of the night, hurling grenades, firing bursts from automatic weapons, then vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. Radio operators screamed for help, but by the time support came, the Americans were gone, already striking another position miles away. By dawn, the Germans were shaken. Entire platoons had been wiped out. Positions that seemed secure in daylight had become death traps after dark. These were no green recruits. These were killers trained to fight like phantoms. Reports shot up the German chain of command. This American division was different. Dangerous. They owned the night. The pattern of fear over the following months. The pattern repeated. On November 2nd, the 104th crossed the Mark River in a night assault that caught German defenders completely off guard. Beginning November 16th, they fought in the Aachen sector, attacking fortified positions that had resisted other Allied divisions for weeks. Allen's night tactics cracked defenses that daylight assaults could not. When the Germans launched their massive Ardennes offensive in December, the Battle of the Bulge, Allen's Timberwolves held firm. From December 15, 1944, to February 22, 1945, they absorbed the shock of German attacks, held critical ground, and prevented the breakthrough from widening. Then, on February 23rd, they crossed the Roer River and surged into Germany itself. By now, the Timberwolves' reputation preceded them. German soldiers rotated from other fronts carried grim warnings. Beware the American division that attacked at night. Captured reports described the 104th as elite troops specializing in nocturnal warfare. German defensive plans were forced to account for the possibility of night assaults, spreading their forces thinner, keeping them on edge, and draining their strength. This was exactly what Allen wanted. An enemy that feared the night was an enemy that could never rest, never relax, never feel safe. Even German propaganda acknowledged it. Axis Sally, the infamous broadcaster Rita Zucca speaking from Rome, railed against the Americans' unfair night fighting in broadcasts monitored by Allied intelligence. Her complaint was, in truth, a backhanded compliment. If the enemy thought your tactics were unfair, you were doing something right. On March 5, 1945, the Timberwolves captured Cologne, one of Germany's great cities. 17 days later, on March 22nd, they crossed the Rhine River, plunging deep into the heart of the Reich. After the crossing, Allen's division advanced 193 miles in just 9 days, halting at Paderborn. Then they pushed another 175 miles in 15 days, reaching the Mulde River. On April 11, 1945, the 104th Infantry Division, alongside the 3rd Armored Division, liberated the Nordhausen concentration camp in central Germany. What they found there would scar them for life. Roughly 3,000 corpses lay scattered across the grounds, many in grotesque stages of decomposition. About 750 prisoners were found alive, though barely, skeletal, diseased, too weak to stand. Many died even after liberation, their bodies too broken to recover. Nordhausen was a sub-camp of the Dora Mittelbau complex, where prisoners had been worked to death building V-2 rockets in underground tunnels. As Allied forces closed in, the Germans abandoned the camp, leaving the prisoners to perish. Allen's men, hardened by 7 months of unrelenting combat, were sickened by what they saw. They had fought German soldiers in open battle and respected them as warriors. But this was different. This was industrialized murder. This was evil. Allen ordered everything photographed. He wanted proof. He brought German civilians from nearby towns to see the atrocities firsthand. Some claimed ignorance. Allen didn't care. They would see. They would know. And they would help bury the dead. The battle for Halle from April 15th to 1945, the division fought a brutal 5-day battle for Halle, a vital industrial city. The fighting was savage, house to house, street by street. German defenders clung to every block. Artillery and tank fire reduced buildings to rubble. Infantry cleared rooms one at a time. Casualties mounted on both sides. During this operation, Allen encountered Count Felix von Luckner, a legendary figure from the First World War. Von Luckner had commanded the commerce raider SMS Siedler, earning the nickname Sea Devil for his daring exploits against Allied shipping. Now, an old man in his 60s, he lived in Halle and sought to spare his city from destruction. Under a flag of truce, von Luckner approached Allen and helped negotiate a partial surrender. His intervention saved much of Halle from annihilation by American artillery and airstrikes. Allen and von Luckner, two warriors from different nations and different wars, treated each other with professional courtesy and mutual respect. They understood one another in a way only combat veterans can. Later, von Luckner was made an honorary colonel of the 104th Infantry Division, a gesture honoring his courage in saving civilian lives. The end approaches on April 26, 1945, at Pretsch on the Elbe River. Soldiers of the 104th Infantry Division made contact with advancing Soviet forces. The announcement was broadcast simultaneously from Washington, London, and Moscow the next day. The Third Reich was cut in two. The end was near. By then, Allen's division had been in continuous combat for 200 days. Not one major objective had been missed. Not one attack had been repulsed. The Germans had learned to fear the night. Axis Sally continued to complain about the Americans' unfair tactics. Wehrmacht units warned each other about the Timberwolves' nocturnal assaults. Canadian General Guy Simons remarked, "Once the Timberwolves got their teeth into the Boche, they showed great dash." In early 1945, after the capture of Cologne, Omar Bradley visited Allen's headquarters. Bradley, the same man who had relieved Allen in Sicily 18 months earlier, was impressed. The 104th had been in combat less than 5 months, yet already it was being compared to veteran divisions that had fought since North Africa. According to Bradley's memoirs, he told Allen, "Terry, I am pleasantly surprised to see these young Timberwolves of yours already ranked along with the 1st and the 9th as the finest assault divisions in the European theater of operations. The 1st Division was Allen's old command, the Big Red One. The 9th was another elite unit with a distinguished record. To be ranked with them after so short a time was extraordinary praise." Allen's reply was pure Terry Allen. "Brad, the 1st and the 9th are in damned fast company." It was not boastful. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the confidence of a commander who knew exactly what his men could do. Vindication Allen had proven his point. The methods that got him fired in Sicily had produced another elite division. The training others thought excessive had forged soldiers who could match any in the army. The man accused of lacking discipline had built a division that never lost a battle. The recognition was sweet, but it could not erase the sting of Sicily. Allen carried that dismissal with him always. Yet he had answered his critics in the most decisive way possible, by doing it again, with an entirely different division. He had shown that his success with the First Division was no fluke. His methods worked. His training paid off. His leadership delivered results. On May 8, 1945, the war in Europe ended. Terry Allen had commanded 2 divisions through some of the hardest fighting of World War II. The First Infantry Division in North Africa and Sicily, and the 104th Infantry Division across northwest Europe. Both divisions believed they were the best in the army. Both were probably right. And both had been shaped by the same man. Consider what Allen accomplished. He took the proud but untested Big Red One and turned it into the spearhead of American offensives. He led them through the disaster at Kasserine Pass, taught them how to beat German armor at El Guitar, landed them under fire at Gela, and held the beaches against counterattack. He drove them up the mountains at Troina against 24 German counterattacks. Every objective assigned, they achieved. Every battle fought, they won. Then, after being fired, he took the green, untested Timberwolves and transformed them into what Bradley himself called one of the finest assault divisions in the European theater. He trained them harder than any other division. He taught them to fight at night when others feared the dark. He led them through 200 days of continuous combat without a single major defeat. They crossed rivers under fire, captured fortified cities, advanced farther and faster than veteran units, liberated concentration camps, and linked up with the Soviets. They did in 7 months what other divisions took years to achieve. This was not luck. This was not inheritance. This was leadership. This was training. This was Terry Allen. After the war, Allen retired from the U.S. Army on August 31, 1946, with the rank of Major General. He had achieved everything a soldier could hope for, except one thing. He never received his 3rd star. He never became a lieutenant general. Perhaps that was the price of being too aggressive, too unconventional, too much of a fighter, and not enough of a diplomat. The very traits that made him a brilliant combat commander made him difficult for the peacetime army to manage. He drank, not excessively in combat, but enough to trouble his superiors. He cursed too freely. He cared little for appearances, but when the guns were firing, when the outcome hung in the balance, Terry Allen was the man you wanted leading your division. Twice, in 2 different wars with 2 different armies, he proved it. General George Marshall himself once wrote to Allen during the war, "I must explain to you that there had come to me from several different sources an indication that you had been drinking. I do not mean you were appearing under the influence of liquor, but I do mean drinking in the daytime." The letter is telling not only for what it said, but for what it did not. Marshall did not relieve Allen. He did not reprimand him formally. He simply warned him and left him in command. Why? Because Marshall understood a truth that others sometimes forgot. In war, you need fighters, and fighters often come with rough edges. Allen's drinking never clouded his judgment in battle. His tactical instincts were sharp, his decisions sound, his units victorious. Marshall was willing to overlook the flaws because Allen delivered where it mattered most, on the battlefield. Bradley and Eisenhower, however, were building an expeditionary army for a long war. They wanted commanders who fit a mold, disciplined, conventional, polished. Allen was none of those things. He was effective, but he made the high command uneasy. So they removed him from the 1st Division, hoping he would fade quietly into the background. Instead, he returned with the 104th and proved them wrong all over again. The fighter's reputation war correspondent Ernie Pyle, who would later be killed in the Pacific in April 1945, captured Allen's essence in words that still resonate. Major General Terry Allen was one of my favorite people, partly because he did not give a damn for hell or high water, partly because he was more colorful than most, and partly because he was the only general outside the Air Forces I could call by his first name. If there was one thing in the world Allen lived and breathed for, it was to fight. He had been shot up in the last war, and he seemed not the least averse to getting shot up again. His pattern for victory was simple. Just wade in and murder the hell out of the low-down good-for-nothing. That was Terry Allen. Direct, profane, relentless, completely committed to his soldiers and to victory. That was the man. Tragedy in Vietnam. After retirement, Allen settled quietly in El Paso, Texas. near Fort Bliss, where his father had once served. He had given his life to the army. Now, at last, he could rest. But peace did not last. On October 17, 1967, tragedy struck. His only son, Lieutenant Colonel Terry de la Mesa Allen, Jr., was killed in Vietnam. He was commanding the 2nd Battalion, 28th Infantry Regiment of the First Infantry Division, the Big Red one, his father's old division. In fact, the battalion Allen Jr. led was the very same battalion his father had commanded in World War I. The family tradition of service had carried across 3 generations, and now it exacted its cruelest price. Allen Jr. was leading his battalion on a search-and-destroy mission near Lai Kay when they walked into a carefully prepared L-shaped ambush by 2 Viet Cong battalions. About 500 Americans were caught in the trap. Heavy machine gun fire and rocket-propelled grenades tore into the formation. The lead companies were shredded in minutes. Allen Jr. moved forward toward the gunfire, rallying his men, trying to organize a defense. He was hit multiple times but refused to stop, continuing to direct his troops until he was killed. Between 58 and 64 Americans died in the ambush, one of the worst single-day losses of the war. For his courage, Allen Jr. was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's 2nd highest award for valor. The death of his son shattered Terry Allen. At 79, already in declining health, the blow was too much. The warrior's tradition that had once seemed noble now felt like a curse. His health collapsed. He suffered strokes, his heart weakened, and though he held on for nearly 2 years, the will to fight was gone. On September 12, 1969, Major General Terry de la Mesa Allen died in El Paso at the age of 81. He was buried at Fort Bliss National Cemetery beside his son. The old cavalryman, the warrior who had fought in 2 world wars, the general who had led men through the deserts of North Africa, the mountains of Sicily, and the forests of Germany, was finally at rest. Legacy today, the United States Military Academy at West Point, the very institution that dismissed him in 1911 for academic failure, presents the General Terry de la Mesa Allen Award to the cadet with the highest rating in military science. The academy that once rejected him now honors his name. The failed cadet became one of the most successful combat commanders in American history, those German soldiers who waited in the Belgian forests in October 1944 thought they would face green American troops, easy prey. Instead, they met Terry Allen's Timberwolves. Within days, German reports described a new threat, an American division that fought like veterans, struck at night, and never stopped coming. Wehrmacht intelligence officers warned others. This division was dangerous. Its commander was the same man who had led the First Infantry Division in North Africa and Sicily. Terrible Terry Allen had returned. By war's end, German veterans who had faced both of Allen's divisions understood what made him different. It was not cruelty or overwhelming firepower. It was training so intense that green recruits fought like veterans from their first day. It was leadership so personal that soldiers would follow him anywhere. It was tactical innovation that turned night from a time of rest into a time of terror. And it was an absolute refusal to accept defeat. Allen never commanded armies. He never wore 3 stars. He was fired at the peak of his success and spent years proving he deserved another chance. But the soldiers who served under him, and the enemies who fought against him, knew the truth. Terry Allen was one of the most effective combat commanders of World War II. He won every major battle he fought. He led 2 different divisions to distinction, and he proved that American soldiers, properly trained and properly led, could defeat the best troops the enemy had. The Germans in those Belgian forests learned that lesson the hard way. The ones who survived spread the word. Terrible Terry was back, and the night belonged to him,